Hi! In this series of videos, we will look at various tools that you can use to create an understanding of who you are designing for and what your users really need. In a design thinking process, these tools especially come in handy in the define phase. The define phase is all about sense-making of the information that you have gathered about your users and crafting a meaningful and actionable problem statement that you can later tackle with your design. And such tools like empathy maps, personas, customer journey maps can help you and your team to create a common understanding of users and their particular needs. In this video, specifically, we will look at empathy maps, what they are, why and when we need them, and how to create them. An empathy map is a simple visualization that captures knowledge about your user's behaviors and attitudes. It's a tool to summarize what the user is saying, doing, feeling, and thinking. An empathy map helps you and your development team to articulate what you know about a particular type of users. It allows to sum up your learnings from the customer research that you have carried out before. And it is often used as a tool to theme the interview insights and break them down into different categories. And this overview of behaviors and attitudes often is the first step towards creating the persona, a fictional but realistic portrayal of target user for your product. Traditionally, empathy maps are split into 4 quadrants: says, thinks, does, and feels. The says quadrant contains what the user says out loud during an interview, on social media, or during any other customer research study. It contains verbatim and direct quotes from your research, and it is important to capture the exact words as the language people use is extremely important. So quotes like, "I keep buying this product because I have never had a bad experience," or "I want something reliable but cheap," or "I do not understand how this product works," could go into this quadrant. The does quadrant contains the actions the user takes. Again, based on your research, you will summarize your user's behavior. What does the user physically do? How does the user go about it? Has there been any change depending on where the user is? Does the presence of others change your user's behavior? For example, if you are designing a better railway service, you might write down everything that is relevant to train-taking experience that you have identified during your research. This could be something like the user buys a ticket a few hours before the ride via the app. The user takes the earliest train to work. He brings his own snack on the train, and many others. The thinks quadrant is a bit tougher. It refers to internal thoughts the user is thinking throughout their experience. What the user thinks is implicit. So this is something the user does not necessarily say out loud, but you could potentially derive. Maybe you observe that the user finds something annoying by the look on their face, but is too polite or unsure to say. Maybe you can determine that what they might be thinking by the way they respond or try to change the conversation topic, or by the suggestions that they make during the conversation. In case you develop a hypothesis what they might be thinking in this quadrant, you could use the interview as an opportunity to expect this and verify this hypothesis and talk about it directly with the customer. Based on gathered research, you can ask yourself, what occupies the user's thoughts? What matters to the user? What makes them feel good or bad? What worries them? So quotes like, "Do they think I'm stupid for not understanding this?" or "This is really annoying," could land in this quadrant. The feels quadrant reflects the user's emotional state. It shows how the user feels. So you can look at your data and ask, how does the user feel? When is the user excited? When is the user frustrated? When is the user feeling the most friction throughout this experience? Similar to your findings in the thinks quadrant, this is usually implicit and something you have to infer from your gathered research. This quadrant often is represented by adjectives and short sentence descriptions for context. For instance, confused, since there are too many contradicting arguments. Anxious, not sure that he has made the right decision in the past. could be ways to describe a user before making a purchasing decision. There is no specific order for completing each quadrant. However, it may be easier to start with the observable activities and quotes. Some of these quadrants may seem ambiguous or overlapping. For example, it may be difficult to distinguish between things and feels. Do not focus too much on being precise. If an item may fit into multiple quadrants, just pick one. The 4 quadrants exist only to give us an overview of our users and to ensure we do not leave out any important dimensions. If you don't have anything to put into a certain quadrant, it's a strong signal that you need more user research before you proceed on to the next step in your design process. So, when and why do we use these simple visualizations of our users' behaviors and attitudes? An empathy map is a great first step when you want to establish a common ground among team members about your users. Empathy maps are most useful at the beginning of the design process, after you have done your user research, but before you define requirements and generate new concept ideas. It can help you categorize and make sense of qualitative research you and your team have carried out before. You can start by creating an empathy map for each user you have interviewed or interacted with. Once you have categorized and distilled knowledge for each of them individually, you can start to search for patterns and create empathy maps for different groups of users or customer segments. Empathy maps can also help you to discover gaps in your current knowledge and identify types of research to address these gaps. If you have empty or almost empty quadrants, you easily see what research should be done next. Empathy maps also make it easier to communicate your findings to other members of your team. On a large team, not everyone has a chance to talk to every user. And empathy maps help synthesize your team's collective knowledge about your users as a group and bring you closer to a common understanding of who they are and what they want. They can help you construct better personas later in the process as well. Let's now briefly look at the basic steps that will help you create your empathy maps. The first step in this process is defining your scope and goals. Figure out who are the users you need to empathize with, and figure out your primary purpose for empathy mapping. Is it to align your team on your user? Is it to identify unknowns in your current understanding of the user? Is it to understand the context for your new and not yet finalized idea? The next step is to gather your data. Empathy mapping is a qualitative method, so you will need qualitative inputs. User interviews, observations, diary studies, focus groups are great qualitative inputs that you can use for empathy mapping. Once you have gathered your data, it is time to synthesize it. With large data sets, you can use professional software to code your data according to 4 quadrants. With smaller data samples, you can also analyze your data without software and do it together in your team. In this case, you can work with whiteboard and post-its or online tools like Mural or Miro. In this case, make sure that every team member records their individual findings. Use one sticky note per observation and place it on an appropriate quadrant on your map. It is suggested to start with creating a separate empathy map for each user you have interviewed or interacted with. Once you have noted and categorized your observations, it is time to start to search for similar or related items. If you are working with post-its, go through the post-its with your team and collaboratively move them together and create clusters. Name your clusters with themes that represent each group of activities, feelings, thoughts, or quotes. The activity of clustering facilitates discussion and alignment, and the goal here is to arrive at a shared understanding of your user among all team members. If you are coding your data, you can create overarching codes within each quadrant. Once your empathy map is clustered, you can begin to reflect about your findings. What user groups emerge? What outliers you see? What themes were repeated in all 4 quadrants? What themes only exist in 1 or 2 quadrants? What gaps exist in our understanding? Finally, make sure to keep empathy maps alive by revising them and adjusting them as you do more research.